Recently here at Tech Yes City, I tested out the RTX 2080 Super, and it was a nice card, especially if you want to get one off the used market for a good old bargain. But there was just something odd about this card, and there's this port on the back. It was a USB Type-C port. And then I checked out the 7900 XTX, thinking I could ignore it because I'm not going to be testing this card for a little bit. But then Type-C port pops up again on AMD's latest card, and I couldn't help but keep staring at it. It's kind of like having a really big zit right on the middle of your nose, and you're walking around, say, a shopping center, and you're like, I hope people don't look at this and notice this, and then everyone's just staring at your nose. And then you're like, yeah! Though in today's video, we are going to test out these Type-C ports on the 7900 XTX and also the RTX 2080 Super for input lag, as well as FPS numbers and the extra features on board. Say for instance, if you want to run a mouse over that USB hub from a gaming monitor, is that going to introduce any difficulties or input lag of its own? Let's get onto the benchmarks and the testing right after today's video sponsor.
Today's video is brought to you by Antec and the Performance One Full Tower ATX case, supporting the ability to mount up to 400mm GPUs in length, including all the latest RTX 4000 series cards, and having the ability to mount two 360mm radiators simultaneously. Then there's a digital CPU and GPU temperature readout, as well as smart cable management covering, so even if you're messy with cable management, you can still make a beautiful build. Links in description below to find out more.
Welcome back to Tech Yes City, and these two graphics cards in today's video, their main purpose with their USB Type-C ports is to run a thing known as DisplayPort alternate mode, or DisplayPort over USB Type-C. Now in this case, the Nvidia card has DisplayPort 1.4 support over USB Type-C, and AMD with the 7900 XTX says that they can support DisplayPort 2.1 over that USB Type-C. And the good thing is here, testing out both these USB Type-C ports with the Evnia 34-inch ultra-wide at 174 Hz, the gaming numbers were virtually identical directly compared to DisplayPort cables itself. Meaning that if you want to use a USB Type-C to power your monitor, especially a lot of monitors nowadays that are coming out, have a USB Type-C port, and they also include a USB Type-C cable, then this is not going to set you back in any way, shape, or form. Another good thing is here too is when I tested out the USB Type-C connection in terms of input lag itself versus a DisplayPort connection, there was no difference. However, that being said, I went a step further here and I decided to go into things a little bit deeper, because while we're on the topic of input lag and 1000 FPS testing, I thought, why not test USB Type-C hubs themselves with a mouse connected rather than directly to the motherboard? And here is where you unfortunately will gain a little bit of input lag. In other words, things will be ever so slightly slower if you're using a mouse and keyboard through either the monitor's USB hub or a Type-C connection hub like this, which is then plugged off, say, a Thunderbolt connection on a motherboard. In both instances, we were averaging around 3 milliseconds slower via using this hub or using the monitor's hub and then running a mouse through that, as opposed to directly connecting the mouse to the motherboard and running it that way. So a tiny bit of extra input lag, that's up to you whether you should care or not. But there were some issues I did run into with both GPUs over this Type-C connection to the monitor. And this is where we plugged up firstly the RTX 2080 Super, where a mouse and keyboard worked absolutely fine. However, when we plugged in our memory card reader and we tried to do some transfer tests, we were limited to USB 2 speeds, which in megabyte form is roughly 50 megabytes per second cap. Though the weird thing here is when we plugged a USB Type-C hub off the GPU, then plugged the memory reader on top of that, we were able to unlock higher speeds. In other words, we were then getting USB 3.2 speeds off this hub itself. Just when it was running the DisplayPort signal, it was only giving out USB 2 speeds. Then moving on to the RX 7900 XTX, here's where a mouse and keyboard worked absolutely fine, just like the Nvidia card, but the memory card reader would not be recognized from the monitor at all, meaning that if you want to do any sort of USB 3 data transfers whilst you're using that DisplayPort signal from that port, you may come into some difficulties. Your mileage may vary here. However, just like the Nvidia card, the memory card plugged into the hub, plugged into the GPU, running no DisplayPort signal, was transferring those memory speeds absolutely fine at the maximum speeds these memory card reader could do and higher than USB 2. So hopefully that wasn't too much to digest, because here's where things get a little bit complicated with the ongoing USB Type-C port on GPUs. Originally in 2018, this port was introduced with RTX 20 series cards, just like this 2080 here, and it was designed for a thing known as Virtual Link. And this Virtual Link, the collaboration between 6 different companies, was mainly designed for VR headsets to really simplify the operation of those headsets and combine the DisplayPort signal, the data transfer, and the power delivery all into one simple, easy to use cable that would just make your life less complicated. Until Valve suddenly canceled their VR headset, the Index, and gave everyone a refund, and then went away with the USB Type-C connection port, and no one spoke about it until a few years later with the introduction of a few different VR headsets, mainly the Oculus Quest 1 and 2, and also especially the PS VR 2 headset, which apparently is officially a Virtual Link headset in that it passes all the boxes for the specified requirements of Virtual Link itself. And those requirements are USB 3.2 Gen 2, in other words, 10 gigabits per second transfers. And then for power delivery, it's 15 to 27 watts, which is negotiable between the two devices used. In the case of the RTX 2080 that we have here, that supports up to 27 watts officially, and the AMD RX 7900 XTX doesn't say anything at all. However, quickly trying to power on the Evnia monitor over USB Type-C completely failed. The monitor just wouldn't turn on at all. However, this monitor can use slightly over 100 watts at its max peak settings, so it was no surprise that it didn't work in this case. However, apparently a lot of people are reporting that they can power low-powered small monitors off these USB Type-C ports. Though the third requirement here is the DisplayPort over USB Type-C or DisplayPort Alt mode. In this case, it's a requirement to have at least 1.4. In the case of the RTX 20 series cards, they support DisplayPort 1.4a. In the case of the RX 7900 XTX, that's got DisplayPort 2.1. And then for the PlayStation 5, that's got HDMI 2.1. Though in terms of its capabilities with DisplayPort, I would just assume that it's DisplayPort 1.4a, since that is what the RX 6000 series graphics cards carry, which is technically the GPU portion in the PlayStation 5. Though with all that information out of the way, now leads us to 2 very important questions, and that is, why was Virtual Link canceled in the first place, and is it going to make a resurgence in the future? Though to answer the first question, the reason it was cancelled was mainly due to technical issues, at least according to Road to VR, as well as a user by the name of Krista raised some very good points on Reddit, and that was that there was too much insertion loss with the USB Type-C connection itself, meaning that the display portion of that signal would just drop out and fail. However, reading the Road to VR's explanation, especially the latter half, they explain the adoptability. And for me personally, having dealt with a lot of customers over the years selling PCs, I can definitely attest to the amount of problems the Virtual Link would have caused for the average person going down to the shop, buying a headset, and then coming home, connecting it to, say, a laptop, and then wondering why their headset doesn't work. I've actually had a lot of people in the past buy PCs off me only to get them home and say there's no signal coming up on the screen, and they've plugged in the display cable to the motherboard rather than the GPU. And that literally happens probably 1 in every 3 PCs that I've sold. So the amount of potential headaches awaiting for the PC world and Virtual Link, I believe, would have been underestimated by the people who designed it in the first place. But I can tell you firsthand, after having some boots on the ground experience, that it would have caused a lot of issues for people trying to use this. And not even just with laptops, for instance. I think a lot of people would have a GPU that wouldn't have a Type-C connection and then plug it off their Type-C connection off their motherboard and then saying, why is this thing not gaming? So now with that first question answered, it segues perfectly into the second question, especially for PC users and Virtual Link. And that is, will this make a comeback or even a resurgence in the future? And here's where it's my personal belief where I think for PC users, it will take a very long time, especially for it to be mainstream. And the reason here is if we look at, say, Steam survey charts and we look at all the top GPUs, none of these GPUs have the USB Type-C connection. And if we look at the headset makers, the VR headset makers, they are not going to want to take a risk in just going exclusive virtual link because that then limits the amount of people that they can sell that headset to. So in the land of PC, at this point in time, for a virtual one cable link only without using any adapters, it's basically a case of a wicked mismatch that will only get solved in mass adoption over time. However, if we look at the PS5, that has a much less complicated path. There's only literally one way you can connect that to your PS5. In other words, it's extremely hard to mess things up in getting that headset to work with what it's intended for. So even though this video started off looking at all types of numbers to do with these Type-C ports on the GPUs for PC, it kind of ended with a big benefit of the consoles, and that is they have that simplicity there, and they are definitely going to take advantage of it, at the very least Sony, who are already taking advantage of it with their PS VR2 headset. And from what I can see, it's actually getting a lot of rave reviews, not just for its price point, but its simplicity and also its OLED screen. So I'm kind of jealous that the PlayStation 5 users do get that advantage over PC right now. Anyhow, guys, with all that out of the way, I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button for us. Also, let us know in the comments section below your thoughts and opinions on today's video. Do you have any other cool things that you've done with USB Type-C personally? Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always. And I didn't mean that in a... And people think, Brian, it's because you're wearing a cap. Well, I had to go to a baseball game today and my hair's all thing, so I'm not filming a video with hair like that. And the good thing is we can now finally cap today's video off with the question of the day, which comes from Cot Angry, and they ask, I used an i9-10900K, and yes, it feels faster in Windows, etc., but not in games. I don't know why. So they're referring to the 10900K versus the 13900K. Well, we did a video on the 10850K versus the 13900K. We found it was better in some areas. However, gaming the 13900K is going to be better there because it ultimately has better performance cores that will get higher FPS. So hopefully that answers that question in that regard. And if you stayed this far and you're enjoying that Tech Yes content as always, be sure to hit that sub button, ring that bell, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out for now. Bye.